Hello, and welcome to Film Bites, the podcast where a lad and his dad talk about films they've just watched. I'm Jack, the lad.
And I'm Andy, the dad. We're here to share our thoughts on the latest movies, classic favourites, and everything in between.
From blockbuster hits to indie gems, we'll give you our take on what's worth watching and what's not.
So grab your popcorn, get comfortable, and join us for some movie talk. Let's roll the intro music and get started. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
The highly anticipated sequel as well, yes.
It's been a bit of time since we saw the first one.
2018?
Which was, for my money, the best Spider-Man movie that's ever been made.
Agreed.
So this one's got quite a lot.
A lot to live up to. A whole lot.
And I thought it did it really well, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So let's break it down then. The story.
This one's definitely more about the family side of things, I would say. It's looking more into Miles's struggles with being Spider-Man and also Miles Morales. And we all know the story by now. Peter has his struggles as well with, if you go back to the Raimi trilogy, with MJ, with being with Aunt May, a job that is functioning and actually workable. And then we even see it with Andrew Garfield, where he's trying to keep a relationship with Gwen, but then he's having these inner struggles with, should he be with Gwen in order to protect her, or should he actually keep his distance, like Captain Stacy said? All of these Spider-Men have, as we all now know from the movie, which I will not spoil as such, have certain significant events that play out and must play out.
I know what you've just said there is pivotal to the way the whole movie pans out. I liked that this movie started off from a completely different centre point. It was from Gwen's point of view.
Yes, loved it.
We had a fairly lengthy build-up, much more of her story, which was very brief in the first film.
But noticeable, I'd say. All of the characters had their noticeable times. Miles was the standout of the first movie, I'd say, as well.
Well, it was Miles' story. It was Miles' introduction in cinema form, which told the story beautifully and also gave a lot of what the actual story of Miles was about. What I liked about this film is it takes what you know and subverts it again and again and again. And he does it in an incredibly powerful style. Soundtrack-wise, now, there's been some criticisms on the early part of the film being a little bit quiet.
Yes, the first 30 minutes, people thought that their cinemas were, and I'm quoting this as well, thought their cinemas were broken as the audio was a bit quiet. It tended to be that some of the dialogue you'd miss because it was quite silent at points and the music was louder, I thought.
Yeah, it was quiet and I thought at times it was a little bit muffled.
It did sound muffled, yes.
Which is again, it's not a sort of slur on what we've seen on screen, but it's just a little bit annoying that wasn't picked up before it's got into the cinema. Yeah. It doesn't detract from the story, which is, again, it's a wonderful story. And I know that we will probably end up watching this a couple more times because there's so much to unpack in these movies that I think you need to give it that second watch.
Definitely.
In terms of the animation, again, it's that glorious comic book styles, mixture of comic book styles, and it's eye-popping in cases.
It honestly blends so many different functions as well with the art styles. Like we've got Gwen Stacy's universe that we briefly see. I actually think that was one of my favourite universes, with these kind of paintbrush strokes that always signify emotion and the kind of judgments that are being made. It is very comic, and it's also very much what Spider-Gwen's comics were like with the covers. And particularly with that universe, it kind of just shows the creative arts, if you will, as well. There's so many references as well that were just so pleasant in the art styles, and there's a universe that I don't want to spoil, but with a character who just doesn't seem at all fazed by the downs of Spider-Man's life. It was incredible. Every part of the art style in this movie was just so delicate but also amazing and bombastic at the same time. Nothing was too in your face, but it was all so pleasant and it was all very well done.
Unbelievable that they can pull off this again after such a feat of engineering that was the first film. Yeah, I mean, I think I know the character that you're on about.
Yes, yeah.
And I thought that was majestic. And if I'm honest with you, I reckon that should have its own story.
Agreed.
That could happily make a spin-off. We saw the fantastic Disney Plus series, Ms. Marvel,
Yeah.
last year, and there was a lot in there that was a lot of fun. And I think some of that elements could be brought to this.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd like to see her character in this in some way, shape, or form, because I think it would just work.
There is an element that is actually quite similar to Multiverse of Madness, and I actually have to say it was done better in this movie by a long shot.
Agreed.
With this particular element, it explored, obviously, the multiverse. It has to. It's across the Spider-Verse, after all. And there is the character in Multiverse of Madness, America Chavez, who can essentially create portals throughout different multiverse timelines and, explore different Earths. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's an element of that in this movie as well.
Well, I suppose the reason why we don't see America Chavez in this...
that's not... Yeah.
Yeah, is because of the main antagonist of the film. Well, yeah. I say main antagonist. There's not a lot of on-screen time for him.
Well, that's because we're building to the next one, which we'll talk about later, but I have to say, I think the portrayal of this character, I don't want to say...
We can say him.
We can say it?
He's been in the trailers.
Oh, that's true. He's a D-tier list villain, and he is literally villain of the week material. The Spot. When you say that name, you think, oh, okay, that's... it's not Doc Ock, it's not Green Goblin, it's not Rhino or Vulture or even Scorpion for that matter. It sounds like a very lame character. And that's because he was in the Silver Age, I believe, where he just appeared briefly. And I mean, the very first encounter with Spider-Man in the comics is that he hears the name, sees the character, and laughs. He can't stop laughing and is on the floor laughing because of how stupid the villain is. Despite that, though, in the comics, he actually gets beaten by the Spot, but we don't talk about that, apparently. And in this movie, they make him a joke at many points.
Yeah.
And even then, you think, hang on, but he's supposed to be this overarching villain for the next movie as well. How does that work? And when you see this movie, I'm not going to lie, I had chills at one point. There was a sequence with the Spot where I thought, oh, okay, we've brought him from D tier to actually potentially could go into B edging A, I'd say, if they do him right. Because it's a character you can't really do in live action. He has powers which are multi-dimensional and can explore different aspects of different worlds and also in a fight.
Given the story that they're looking to tell, they had to do what they did with their character.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And I think you also had, the surrounding story and the surrounding narrative of ultimately the why of Miles. And I think that's the interesting thing that the movie did develop and took time to develop over the course of it. It wasn't just a Miles story. This is a story that really encompasses his origin and a lot of other origins. And I thought it did extremely well. The sound in the movie, the actual music and score of the movie, I thought was fantastic. It gave me real sort of vibes of the second Tron movie.
I think there's some Blade Runner vibes as well.
Yeah, some searing synths and stuff. And it was just really wonderful the way that they all packed it all together. In terms of other characters in here, your Spider-Man know an awful lot more than me.
Even now, I'm still overwhelmed, but at the same time, they've done it excellently. I'll only refer to characters that appear in the trailer. We have a brief appearance with, Spider-Man, but this one is Ben Reilly, also known as the Scarlet Spider. He appears briefly, and I think that a lot of people that have devoted themselves to the 90s comics and really like Ben Reilly, they'll probably feel a bit mixed on the character. I didn't mind it. I thought it was very going back to when it was made. This was at a peak when comics were kind of running out of ideas and they realised if they just do something that's so crazy, then they'll get money out of it. So they did a different looking suit, if you will. Spider-Man's suit went from red and blue to, blue and red, essentially. It was a blue hoodie with a red suit. And the design is, in my opinion, radical, which was essentially the 90s radical cool. He is done well in this movie. I think if people expect him to be prominent, maybe not, but he's still very good. I really enjoyed that character. We've got other characters like Spider-Punk, which I don't think we agree on this one, do we?
No. In all honesty, I found it quite irritating. I understand why it was there and the way that it was going about it, but I just found it irritating. There's better Spider-Man on screen, and he wasn't one that did it for me.
Well, on contrast, I love Spider-Punk. I think he's great. And honestly, if he was around for our modern politics, I won't get into it, but that'd be great. He's very radical as well. Totally out of the blue. And what a way to introduce a character. He just appears. Oi, oi! Amazing. I love a character that just already signifies, oh, he's different. He's very different from other spider people in this universe.
I think I just found it a bit distracting. I mean, I know the nature of the art style is that they were going for kind of the Sex Pistols.
Sex Pistols art style,
Never mind, though,
Yeah.
But I just found it distracting, and I just found it didn't really forward much of the story anyway for me. And so, ultimately, I just found him annoying.
Well, I disagree.
Blimey, we don't often disagree on here, do we? But there's other great aspects to this. I mean, Spider-Man, was it 2099?
2099, Miguel O'Hara, who is 50% spider, 50% human. That makes him different.
He was
a menace.
Yeah, I mean, because the spots on screen's not much initially.
Halfway through, you would just say that?
I would say that he fulfills the role of
villain.
Yeah, but even though he isn't, and the purpose is revealed as the story goes along, I liked his character more than Spider-Punk for sure. And we know that the best one.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he's in the trailer. That's the problem.
He isn't, and I don't even think he's in the poster, so we won't reveal him. But it's definitely
great.
Yeah. There's one to look out for in this, and it's not just the sort of comedy aspects of him. It's just everything about the fun of the character and the way and the where that it's explored.
It's the first spider person I've ever seen that isn't depressed. It is amazing.
Although that in itself has a plot line in here as to why.
Yes, and that is whoa.
It's probably the signature of any Spider-Man story that, again, this film successfully subverts. So I'm going to sum it up, because this is a halfway point really in the film. We can only give it a full sort of breakdown after we've seen the second one and where it goes to. True. And we also do want to see this again.
Yes.
To see, A, if our opinion changes, and B, if we spot more detail in the revealing, because there's a lot of things that you only find out towards the end or even after this.
There's probably a lot of foreshadowing, because I've realised, and I'm going to say this without context as well, the number 42 actually appears a lot. It appeared in the first movie, twice I think, probably more than that, and it appears a lot in this movie, and there's significance as to why. It's almost like a kind of, if you were with Doctor Who, the crack in the wall, an overarching theme that plays out. And I've got to say, wow, that is a heartbreaking but also very tense reveal.
Very much so. For me, I don't think I prefer this yet to the first one. I think this one is great. I think it's going to get even better on the second watch.
I agree.
And I think it's going to make the third film extraordinary to surpass both of the first two movies that it'll have to conclude.
The reason why I think Beyond is already going to be better is because a lot of Across is build. The first 40 minutes of this movie, I'd say, probably 45 edging it, is build. It's not really action. It's not really the exploration of Spider-Man as such. It's actually family. Not to be Fast and Furious related, but it is quite literally family. And it's quite lengthy sequences as well, which surprised me, and I actually felt a bit of the time in that situation, but not in a bad way. I thought that was actually very compelling, because at the end of the day, we have these Spider-Man movies and these comics where we explore the story arcs of Peter Parker, Miguel O'Hara, and Gwen that we see elements of, but we don't actually explore whole sequences of in movies as well, or comics for that matter. For example, Raimi's trilogy had elements where we saw conversations between Aunt May and Peter. I mean, it was heavily implied, in my opinion, that Aunt May knew. She definitely knew. And you could kind of see that in a lot of areas, I thought, as well, which was great. Again, it's the same with Peter Parker with Andrew Garfield. There was a lot of the exploration with the family aspect because it was, it was the agent's storyline that they didn't get to fully explore. But with Miles, it's so welcoming, I'd say, to see that we can explore these two parents alongside a big family event as well. I think that Miles, in terms of responsibility, he has had his responsibility speech from his uncle in the first movie. And with the canon events, we know that certain sequences...
Oh, yes, you just said something there. Canon events.
Yes.
What a fantastic idea.
I don't want to go too much into it because it's such a great plot line. But the canon event sequences, if you're a Spider-Man fan, if you're a Marvel fan, or actually, for that matter, if you know sequences even outside of Marvel, what makes Batman Batman and what is always the correlation with every Batman that we see? Something must happen for him to be Batman. It's the same with Peter Parker. It's the same with Miles. It's the same with Gwen. It's the same with every Spider person. We all must have a canon event that takes place. And I think with that being a core theme, and that's why we have family as an exploration, I think that is absolutely spectacular. So that's why I actually think Beyond is going to be better, because we've now done the build. We've now explored these sequences of events that are leading up to Beyond. So Beyond is going to be a mess. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to be disastrous. But it is also going to be emotionally compelling, I think, as well. And I think that's where they've done this. Across is the build. Beyond is the delivery.
Well, as we've seen with former Marvel films like Infinity War and Endgame, what we don't want is for them to take a safe route.
Oh.
Because Endgame, whilst it was visually spectacular, was fairly soulless as a story.
I think that there was a lot of fan service that I really enjoyed. When I say fan service, I'm not the critics. The critics say fan service as if it's a bad thing.
No, it's a good thing.
I love fan service. I'm basically craving it every day. It's just part of the fandom. That's basically what it is. I think there's a part of fan service, though, where you can over-deliver. So, for example, with Endgame, there was a lot of good moments. Really strong
visually
moments
stunning.
that I love. And I think that end battle is absolutely fantastic. However, after you leave that storyline and then you go on to other things like WandaVision and you explore there, I feel like those events now, whilst they're special, they now don't mean as much. And that's not so much because Endgame is a bad movie, it's just that I think the ending was safe.
It didn't take any risks whatsoever.
If you leave the character like No Way Home in a position where, yes, he is now at his peak, he is now this character that has grown, with Spider-Man being now the true Spider-Man that we know of, in the comic sense, Earth 616, then, yeah, I think that No Way Home did a better job of an ending than Endgame, because that is what essentially Spider-Man must be. He must have these losses, and he's become a true Spider-Man. I think with the next movie, because I don't want to spoil the ending of this one, this is a great ending.
Wow. Yeah.
I will say it wasn't that surprising, cliffhanger-wise. There were hints.
Yeah, I think it was an inevitable cliffhanger.
Yeah.
But I think it's a cliffhanger that was still done very well.
The particular one that got me was a reveal.
Mm-hmm.
I think you know what I'm talking about. Which that one I was like, oh, no, I didn't expect that one. But I expected an element behind it. So for this next movie, they need to take risks because, I mean, they've already done it. They've already taken a massive risk in this movie alone. I won't say what, but again, 42. That's the key number there, and that is why it's a risk. And it makes it so interesting. I think there's going to be an element that will be used, I don't want to say what, in the next movie, and it will play out in a very risky manner. At the end of the day, canon events, they're cataclysmic if they go wrong. We don't know. We've seen it with incursion events and Multiverse of Madness, and essentially this is now another Multiverse of Madness situation, except far better. And I just think this movie's fantastic. I've just rambled on a bit, I do apologise. But this movie is absolutely incredible and should be watched in cinemas as well.
Completely agree. Go and see it. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is in cinemas now. the Flash movie.
Indeed.
This has been something we've been waiting for an awfully long time.
Since the CW Flash aired, which was about, 10 years ago now?
It must be.
Whole decade later, we finally got the movie.
This hasn't been without its problems.
Yeah.
Ezra Miller hasn't helped the marketing aspects of the film for sure.
No. Especially when you're the main star of this as well.
Yes, it's all been a little bit uncomfortable to get to the screen, but now that it's on the screen, let's actually talk about the movie itself. I think right from the get-go, this was an awful lot of fun, and I think arguably one of DC's best movies. What did you think?
Completely agree. I think that this is one of the most comic book DC movies I have watched in a long time. I think with respects to other movies as well, I think that it's not what the marketing is saying the best DC movie of all time. I don't think you'll top many films. I think that certain movies that are comic book and non-comic book, like Superman, which is in 1978, I want to say. 78, yeah. You've also got Batman Returns, the 89, and you've also got 90. And, those ones are on pedestals. You can't beat those comic book movies. And you've also got Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. I'd say that the best of the whole three of them is Dark Knight.
Absolutely.
I also think that Man of Steel is probably my favourite DCEU movie, if I'm honest with you.
Yes.
I think that one just still stands out, and I don't really understand the hate as such.
Well, funny you should mention Man of Steel. I mean, this one's obviously got... The Flash has got a lot of references from Man of Steel in there, and we'll come to those in a bit. But yeah, I just think they've managed to get an awful lot of this right, and it's been quite tumultuous at Warner Brothers with all the merger and everything. So, I mean, it's been complicated, but I think right from the start, you knew that this was going to be a bit of fun. They were going to take risks.
I mean, the opening track.
Yep.
The song that they start with is one of my favourite songs because it's both amazing but also hilarious in so many contexts.
And given what goes off on the screen...
Oh, it just works. I mean, it is one of the most bonkers intros to a movie I have seen probably throughout my life. It is unbelievably bizarre, but it's almost like a Silver Age Flash comic. I can see it as a cover. I don't want to spoil it, but oh my word, is it absolutely incredible the way it's done.
It's jaw-dropping, and the special effects in that particular sequence are just spot on. And you can tell right from that point that we're in for something different. And I think you can tell that all the way through this movie, they were taking risks.
Oh, definitely.
Some worked, some didn't, but the majority hit. And I think that's what I really, really enjoyed about this. So we obviously have the main story of Flashpoint.
Yes, which has deviated quite a bit from the initial comic, which was, even in itself at the time, one of the most controversial comics in its entire run. It took some risks, killing off one of the best characters, Batman, in the comics, and replacing him with another Batman, his father. Bruce Wayne died, but Thomas and Martha Wayne lived. There was alternate timeline aspects as well, with Wonder Woman and Aquaman being at war with one another. There was also the Flash losing his speed as an initial part of the story. When you've got the entire comic called Flashpoint, it was very risky stuff, and I thought personally it somehow managed to get back up on its feet, even though it looked like this was a big mess. And it just worked in the comics. I mean, the whole context I think it was nailed down to a T. It has since been used a lot in pieces of media.
As an excuse as well.
Yes,
anyway.
So anytime we've killed off a character or we've done something catastrophic, like let's say burn the world to the ground, how about we use Flash as Flashpoint and then reboot the universe? New comics. It was a get out of jail card, essentially. But in this movie, I actually thought it was both relevant to what the DCEU is, but also it was very nice to go back to things that we recognised and also explore a different take on Flashpoint with those elements that we still understand from the comics as well. I thought that was very well done.
Yeah, I mean, so we kind of get this intro. It's Batfleck, Ben Affleck's Batman.
With a bit of a shade of blue to his armour this time.
I tell you what, I think this was probably his best Batman performance.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, I know we've had all of the Snyder's vision of what Batman should be, but I think this one is probably, he's given a bit more meat to work with. I think he comes across as a strong Bruce Wayne.
Oh, he's definitely had more lights on that one now. I'm glad that
he's been allowed to do it this time, and I think he also comes across as a strong Batman. And in the brief amount of screen time that he gets, I think he does a really good job.
Agreed.
We also have, obviously, some other cameos in there. I think they've already been announced, so we can talk a little bit about the first couple. And then, obviously, the raison d'etre for this movie is that he wants to go back and save his mum.
It's the realisation that he can, I think, as well. This is a Flash that is still very early on in his days. It's Barry still understanding his powers. I mean, it sounds like he's recently got this new suit as well. So he's kind of configuring certain things about himself, but also understanding, actually, I could do a lot. I could fix things. But then there's always the buts. What happens if you do fix things?
There's this kind of gleeful immaturity about him.
Which is what he always should be.
Yeah. Personally, I'm going to say it. I think I prefer Grant Gustin's take on the Flash.
Agreed.
I will
say it did get a bit weaker as it went on, I thought.
Yeah, certainly those early series, I thought he was a much lighter, much more likeable Flash. And I think possibly some of what's happened around this movie has soured the way that you view Ezra Miller in this.
Which is very unfortunate.
It is a shame, because I think a lot of the work that Ezra does in this film is really good. It's certainly a step up from the minor roles he's had in Justice League
and Suicide Squad.
Yeah, I think I wanted to engage with him more, but I just have this nagging doubt. This is probably the last time he's going to be in a DC movie, given what's going off. I would find it unlikely to see an iteration of Flash in the near future, given what Gunn's doing with the DC.
If they do a new iteration, I'd really like it to be Wally West. Yeah, I would like the Wally West suit. I wouldn't want it particularly just red.
I think we're a long way off that.
I know, that's the only unfortunate part.
So the main part of the story happens. It happens really well.
I don't think it's rushed either. I think it's done in a very level-headed way, I would say. It's not to the point of, we need to get to this point immediately, in a flash, if you will. It's actually taking delicacies in certain things with character build. It's taking little steps in understanding where Barry is, and then we get to that point. Why does he go back?
I think there's now an awful lot of multiverse floating about, whether it's Everything Everywhere All at Once, or whether it is the actual Marvel ones that have been starting to concentrate on this quite heavily.
Yes.
And even the other film that we've reviewed in this podcast.
Yes.
Spider-Verse. There's all very different ways of telling you and exploring this multiverse. But I think this one
actually does I have to agree, it does quite a good job.
Yeah, it simplifies it and makes it easier to understand.
It almost feels like they cast a bit of shade on the MCU one, I must say. That they even showed an explanation of the MCU one briefly. They didn't say out and out it was the MCU one, but the MCU essentially says, if you think of it as a thin line, horizontal, there is a certain point in the middle of that line where the line still continues, but it goes curving upwards, so you have a separate timeline that's formed from this one. But actually, that's not how it works. It doesn't just strand off. There's a fixed point that must always happen, a bit like the canon events, if you will, where something must occur that causes, if you will, not the horizontal lines, but almost like an X shape. So imagine the middle of an X is where the thing must connect, but there is a new future and a new past that's been created on both timelines. I think that is absolutely brilliant. It's a nice little way to tie in certain things.
Yeah, and in a film that is complicated by a lot of detail in it, I think it actually made it very, very straightforward for you to understand the movie.
Yeah, which is quite interesting for a time travel movie, especially with the context of Flashpoint.
I didn't come out of this baffled in any way, shape or form.
I actually thought it was quite coherent, which was really surprising, because I was expecting something very odd.
And that's got to be a credit to Andy Muschietti, who he just did a remarkable job of pulling all these strands together.
I must say as well, with the direction and the visual effects of The Flash himself, I really appreciated the way in which we explored stuff like the Speed Force, but also there is an excellent shot that I will always appreciate about The Flash in this movie, which is the opening scene where he's about to take off, he's about to run to do his first mission of the movie, and it kind of does a close-up on his foot, and the screen warps. Everything becomes so disorienting, and it looks off-putting, but also really awesome at the same time. Because at the end of the day, he's so fast, he's seeing these things as a blur.
Yeah.
And he's not really seeing them as a blur, but we're seeing them as a blur from his perspective. It was so well done, and it's done throughout the movie so well as well, especially in fight sequences, I would say, as well. But we also have to talk about a certain character with fight sequences, if I may say.
Okay, go ahead. We
also have certain aspects of time travel that obviously go wrong. So when Barry goes back and saves his mother, which has been promoted in the material, I can say that.
I mean, it's the main thing with Flashpoint, so we may as well just get that straight out of the way.
The consequences are that Barry needs help from the Justice League, but we don't know where this Justice League is, because it could be the same Justice League, it could be a different Justice League, it could be that there are no Justice League members. But what we do know from the trailers and everything that has been promoted heavily is that we know there is a Batman. And this Batman is not a typical Batman in Barry's case. This is not someone that he's gotten on with. He's the playboy billionaire philanthropist that sells him the suit and then creates this superhero that associates alongside him. This is a Batman that has grown very tired. He's not been fighting for years. He's retired. He's miserable. And Wayne Manor does not look great, but it still holds certain nostalgic feelings. And then when you realise who this Batman is, it's the Batman that many have grown up on. It's Batman 1989, Michael Keaton.
And that, let's be honest, as soon as you start getting those first few notes of the Batman March,
oh my,
wow, the goosebumps go up and you are there again. And the good thing about this was we had the initial look at Batman, who is that jaded character. It looks like he's just giving up. We have him reinvigorated, but we have also the tech of that time.
Analog, I'd say.
Yeah, it's and again, very well done. Crowd pleasing, yes. And one of the criticisms of the film is that it's got too much fan service. I think that's absolute rubbish. I think there's just the right amount of fan service in this. If you're a DC fan, you should enjoy this because there's an awful lot of fun to be had with your favourite characters. But it is just a crowd pleaser. You get nods to all of those big characters that we've already talked about. And they're done in not a way that's just flippant or oversimplified. They're done with some genuine reason for being on the screen. With regards to the CGI, a couple of times, I think we need to talk about that because you can tell simply because this film was so ambitious.
Yes.
And let's make no bones about it. This is probably one of the most ambitious movies that they've done, and that includes the Justice League from Zack Snyder.
I agree.
Who got the opportunity to add more budget to complete some of the work on that. I think, even with another year of polish, that this film would probably still not have been as good as it could have been. I think the effects need to catch up with it. I mean, the people that did the effects largely on this were Weta, who did Lord of the Rings, King Kong and all that kind of stuff. And you just think, well, we know that they're capable of just delicious stuff that goes off on screen.
Some of the best CGI that we've seen in our time, yeah.
So it makes you wonder whether they were either given a brief that was very short for the CGI. Because I know that even in previous screenings around March time for this film, CGI wasn't finished.
No, I know.
And how long has this film been delayed?
The thing is, I'm pretty sure we were supposed to get it back in 2021.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the pandemic hit everything.
Well, yes, but still with the CGI being unprepared at that point.
And you had a year with Ezra's debacles, which again should have given them an opportunity to give it a bit more sparkle. There were just some sequences in the film that just looked a bit uncanny valley.
It was a bit odd. I think that some shoddy VFX made its way into the movie that was a bit like, a bit distracting. I don't want to focus on it too heavily.
No, I wouldn't even say it's shoddy. It just didn't feel finished at times. Which
is why I would say that there's a certain element that I won't talk about. I'll tell you afterwards, but I just felt a bit like that was off-putting. That there's certain CGI bits later in the movie as well where I really wanted to be captured by it, but I wasn't quite. It was almost like, I really like that. Why didn't I love it though? And that was certain parts of the CG, unfortunately. But what I will say is that I don't like, outside of the movie, some people's initial reactions to certain things. I don't understand this established hate culture that we now have for any movie that comes out. And it's not just The Flash, it's not just something like the new Avengers movies that are coming up, or Marvel movies. It is any time an announcement has been made for a movie, there is initial reactions of excitement. There's always excitement, but any kind of teaser of a suit, of a trailer, anything of the sort, oh, this looks awful, this looks so generic, it's boring, and then you just keep getting everyone hate watching. And I don't get it. I don't get this established hate culture. I honestly think it's come from the end of Endgame. I think since Endgame, everyone's all of a sudden just been piling on the hate, and it's just odd.
Yeah, I think
don't get me wrong. I think that since Endgame, with a lot of movies associated to superhero aspects, there's been a dip in quality. I will absolutely say there's been a dip.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say anything anywhere near what I've seen online. It is awful, some of the things I have seen. And I don't agree with the factor that we should focus on the CGI of the Flash and then say shouldn't watch it. If anything, the CGI, whilst used heavily in a lot of points, there's some really fantastic or, jaw-dropping moments that I absolutely love. And I will gush over them because they're so good. And I would absolutely say that there's some standout moments in this movie that I absolutely love with the CGI.
Yeah.
But I just... Oh, it's frustrating.
I think when it works, it really works.
Yeah.
When it doesn't, it really doesn't.
Yeah.
It's not detracting to the plot, distracting even. It is just something that you kind of hoped that it would have been better.
Yeah.
But yes, it doesn't really take away that magic, and there's a lot of magic to be had in this. I mean, obviously, very publicly, there's been issues concerning Henry Cavill's Superman.
Yeah.
Which is really sad, really, because in this film, you could have had some kind of appearance from him. But given all the debacle that's happened there, again, because they've got it wrong, we are not given the opportunity to give him a send-off, which is a shame.
Yeah.
But we do get
Supergirl. I took a bit of time on that. Sasha Calle portrays this character of Supergirl, whilst I wouldn't say long, for a very short period of time that I thoroughly enjoyed. I think she stood out in performance roles. I think that the established plotline of what was going on with her Supergirl made sense. It's very much tying into the comics of Flashpoint. For a moment, I thought we might get Russian Supergirl. I was very concerned if we'd get that all of a sudden. It's like, oh no, not another evil super person.
But that would have been a bit of a reach given the context of the film. So fortunately, that wasn't the case.
Yeah,
she's not an actress that I've heard of previously.
Never. Yeah,
she's not somebody that I would have even given a second look to in any other circumstances, particularly. But wow, does she do a good job in this film. She is vulnerable, believable. In the very short time that she has on screen,
she is a show stealer.
I'm not worried that Cavill wasn't on screen because she carries that part really well. And it's given enough explanation to understand what this is all about. And then we obviously get a big battle sequence.
We always have a third act battle sequence, yes.
But I thought it was really good.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think with third act battle sequences that usually play out now in superhero movies, they either work or they don't. And in this particular instance, I thought it really worked.
Yeah.
There is one part that we'll talk about a bit later on, but not the battle sequence itself, more the part afterwards. I'll talk about the battle sequence itself and then the bit after. Yep. But the battle sequence itself is a spectacle, in my opinion. I think it's a great way to show these characters' vulnerabilities, these characters in their own particular ways in which they go about things. There's the flashes that we see. We have two flashes, which is jarring but amazing.
Yes.
And the particular fight sequences that play out, so you've got one that's still an amateur, but you've also got one that's professional. So the kind of rotations and seeing how they fight in the scenes against an army is incredible. And then seeing the particular fight sequences with Michael Keaton's Batman in the Batwing. Oh, wow, that's a crowd pleaser already.
And obviously the villain we've got here is Zod.
General Zod's back, yeah.
So if you've been watching those DC EU movies, Man of Steel, this really is a proper counterpoint to the original battle
Yes.
from the end of Man of Steel. But it's clever. It manages to do something fresh with something that essentially you should already know.
Exactly.
But again, because of this flashpoint happening, it's twisted on its head a little bit. I thought the actual CGI was not distracting during the main battle. In fact, some of the 360-degree stuff that was going off was very impressive.
I loved that particular.
And the sound as well. I mean, it was loud enough in the X Plus at the showcase that we saw it at to rattle the seats. So you felt quite immersed into the film. At one point, I even said to you, I thought, has this gone 4D?
No.
Because it really did feel like the seats were rattling in time when the explosions were taking place. And it was exciting. For the first time in a long time, I just found myself smiling at this battle as it was unravelling. And don't get me wrong, we've watched some cracking movies this year.
Definitely.
Especially in the superhero genre. But there was just so much fun to be had in this.
I think this had a spark. And not to say that the other movies haven't had a spark, because they do.
Yeah.
But this particularly stood out in terms of battle sequence. It was just like, this is something I like seeing, honestly. It's not carnage to the point in which it's like, it's just mindless. It's actually got some coherency, and it's also got particular choices that actually play a part to the character's development in the middle of a fight. It's so good.
And it was brutal, but just brutal enough.
Yes.
It wasn't something that was, again, taking away the whole superhero feel to the movie. It was just right, and I think they got all of those elements right.
I've got to say, with Sasha Kaya as well, fighting General Zod, I loved it. It's just seeing her not hold back, really, because let's be honest, with Kal-El, the only time he didn't really hold back was when Zod encountered his mother. It's the moment where he's punching him through the crop fields and "Don't touch my mother," and then boom, into a gas station. It's an incredible sequence, and I love it so much. Sasha Kaye, basically, imagine that particular sequence is her throughout the entire fight. It's just like, oh my god, she is not holding back, and I love it so much. It's something like Injustice. It's like a battleground between two gods, and it's just fun.
Well, particularly because prior to that point, she's been quite vulnerable.
Oh yeah,
in where she's been kept. It was just brilliant, just a lot of fun. So obviously after the main battle,
now this is where it's interesting,
where we have the reality that history's going to loop.
It's
unless
got to
something
happen.
else happens.
Yes, without spoilers, of course.
Of course, we're not going to spoil it. But I think what it does relatively unemotionally, but in such a lovely way as well. And I think you actually see some of Ezra Miller's acting range come out.
Oh yeah, this is their standout moment.
There's an absolutely beautiful sequence to kind of give that sort of circle of the story a completion point. And I really, really liked what they did with that.
I think the way in which they established this character from beginning to end is, no matter what choice you make in the situation, not everything has a solution. And that was quoted by his own mother.
Yeah.
It's a whole theme throughout the movie, and it's fantastically done. And to see it play out and to see what I thought was close to another comic, not Flashpoint. I won't say what, but there is something that reminded me of a few other things. And I thought, oh, this is clever. It felt like if we didn't have the new James Gunn and Peter Safran leadership, I think we would have seen a direction very ambitious, but I don't think it would have been as good. So I'm glad it was nodded to in this movie. But there was, I would say, it's going to be controversial, I'd say, because of the choices they made with something that, they've done, particularly with certain actors.
Yes.
I will say, partly, yes, there is some implications with doing stuff like that. I mean, even other franchises I will not name to give hints as to what I'm talking about, but a big franchise has done a big movie where they made a decision with certain CG elements, and it caused a bit of a stir up in the community to say, was that a good idea? And I think sometimes it can work, sometimes it might not. In this particular instance, whilst it might feel uncanny, I thought that it was a nice touch. I don't hate it.
No.
I actually really enjoyed a lot of the ideas that were put on screen. And I think in a lot of ways, it was meant to be a love letter, not something as such to be used and overused for the future.
Completely agree. That phrase there, love letter, there's a lot of this film that's a love letter to the entire DC movies that have ever been made. And coming on to some of the cameos that are in this, we're not going to name names, but they were a breath of fresh air. They were very cleverly done. There's one that was a really standout one.
I think I know which one you're referring to, yeah.
I mean, I almost felt like whooping for that one, if I'm honest with you, because I just thought, that is clever.
If you know your stuff, wow. Yeah. They did that.
They went to a place that they've never been before.
Yep.
And it was just, that was really a whoop moment, for sure.
I can tell you for a fact, though, if people have no idea what that's about, they go, hang on, is that? And then go very balmy about
it. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is.
I mean, the only kind of sort of downside really for the experience, I suppose, whilst it was relatively nice and quiet for us to appreciate the movie, it was very empty cinema considering it was the opening weekend of this movie.
Yeah. The thing about DC, I have to say, is every time we've gone to see a DC movie, the fans will absolutely hype up anything. You know, they'll say that this movie is going to be incredible, and they'll say these really positive things. There's the other side of it as well, which I've already briefly addressed, but oh gosh. To say the hype around it from, I would say, the proper DC fans, it was empty. There was probably what? So there's us and probably about, I'd say 13 people.
Yeah, it was mind-blowing, really. Which is a shame, because I think this is a film that does deserve bums on seats. There's an awful lot to enjoy in this film, and I don't know... Well, let's be honest, we talked about this before. The marketing was like ups and downs.
The first trailer was all right.
Yeah.
Second trailer, whoa! Oh, that was great. Third trailer, okay, we've gone back a bit.
And these little TV spots, and the music's terrible in the background. But also,
they kept trying to do Keaton's March as well, and it didn't sound right.
And they've also tried to clip some of the gags from the movie.
Nope.
But they just don't need to. I mean, it works in its own right, and there was enough material in that movie to have done some awesome trailers. And you see, it didn't really hit before actually seeing the film, and I think the film is a lot better than the trailers give it credit for.
Agreed.
There is one after-credit sequence in this.
Was it necessary? Probably not.
I don't think it particularly was.
I have a feeling there was a placeholder there. Yeah. So it's almost like they had an idea. There's probably connections to Aquaman 2 or potentially another movie of some form.
Yeah.
Didn't work.
I think if you were busting for a wee at the end of the film...
you'd be fuming.
I think... Go and have your wee. I don't really genuinely think that this is an after-credit sequence that's up there.
I did check, by the way. I searched up, is there an after-credit sequence after we saw the movie, just to see what people have said. There's a whole description on it. Honestly, read it. It's not particularly worth watching, but I will say this ending. When you have a typical ending for a movie that's superhero-based, you expect, oh yeah, it's all gone. It's all done. And you can tell that there were some ideas that they were going to play around with. And there's even rumours that there was... I mean, it says there were 3, but I have a feeling there were more.
Same.
We've got one of the 3, and I've read what the other 2 are, and I'll tell you them afterwards. But they were ambitious in what they were trying to do, but then it would have been a bit messy, in my opinion.
Yeah. There was already enough saturation in the story.
Yeah.
It didn't need too much at the end. I think they got away with it. I don't... It's harmless enough, if I'm honest with you. Simply because we know that it's unlikely that this iteration of Flash is coming back in the DCU that Gunn is doing. I mean, he's very much... This Gods and Monsters thing that he's working with is more about getting your Superman as the big story again.
Which needed to happen.
Yeah. But I suppose because he's overseeing it and because he's written the story, and given that we know just how good he writes with Guardians of the Galaxy 3.
I think he understands the character from what I've heard so far as well.
There seems to be a lot of love in that, and I think we've just got to respect this process as he works forward with it. So yes, we're not probably going to see any more of the Flash in this iteration. I'm not heartbroken by that, but this is a very, very fun and entertaining movie that's certainly worthwhile going to see in the summer. But I think the plus point from this is that it's given us a revelation that Andy Muschietti and his missus are definitely the people to be overseeing the next project, which we believe is Batman
Brave and the Bold, which is a new spin on Batman because we don't actually know if it's going to be Bruce Wayne this time. It could actually be Dick Grayson. The only thing I would say with that is if we do get Dick Grayson as Batman, I'd like it, but I would like to see Nightwing first. I've always wanted to see a proper Nightwing. I like Titans. I want to see Nightwing with the long hair, Bloodhaven, managing by himself, doesn't really need Batman, can actually handle his own fights.
I think we're a few years off when that's going to be, because obviously Matt Reeves is still doing his work with Batman in their Elseworlds section, which I think is a fabulous idea. I think it does give it that nice...
It gives directors and writers more opportunity to just explore.
But I think seeing Muschietti do what he's done with this film, I am excited to see what he can do in that standalone project.
Agreed. Especially with the direction of 2 Batmans in this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Batfleck and then you've also got 89. I'm blown away by the both of them. I think what's really nice about Batfleck is that it still feels like Zack Snyder's creation. And with 89, it still feels like Tim Burton's creation.
Yeah.
There's still those gothic elements to 89, and there's still those analog feelings of 89.
And what he managed to do in this film was to still keep both of the momentum from that.
Yes, yeah.
But also keep it quite light and fresh. I think the thing that bogged down a lot of Zack Snyder's vision, which is visually stunning, but it was the overly dark tone. And I think a lot of what things like Superman are about is hope. And I think that's where in the Justice League movie, that hope wasn't particularly given any kind of strength or purpose. It was really about them kind of getting their asses whooped.
Yeah, pretty much.
And with any superhero movie, you want them to see their asses whooped, or you want them to come out on top. And to explore that over 9 hours of cinema, I think is probably too far for a superhero movie.
I'll be honest. Sometimes I think seeing events like Infinity War, where we see them lose, I actually think sometimes whilst they haven't come out on top in that movie, I would actually like to see a movie where that actually does happen and that's it. We have to wait for the next movie. Not like Endgame where it just resolves everything. Where actually there's some repercussions to this. There are things where they'll have to learn to adapt from that.
And potentially that could have been Quantum Mania.
Oh.
But it just didn't happen.
There was no repercussions. If anything, the weirdest part about Quantum Mania's repercussions was that it was a self-monologue at the end. It was a thought process, and it was like, did I do the wrong thing? Was this a big thing? Is Kang such and such? And it was just a bit like, well, you could have been asking these questions when you've just fought him. And I just felt like, no. There's no worrisome, aspects about Quantumania, whereas something like Infinity War was like, oh, this is bad. And I would like more of Infinity War, but without the Endgame. Yeah. As much as I love Endgame fixed everything from Infinity War with the odd thing, and that was it.
What we're saying is we want the risks back in it.
Yes.
We want the levels to be higher.
I'd say arguably Flash did a risk.
Yes.
I mean, I wasn't expecting the ending.
No.
But I thought it was great.
It was clever.
Yeah.
It was clever. It was done in the right way, like a kind of,
yeah.
Yes, I get you. Because sometimes it is just so frustrating that these things end on such a whimper. And this one didn't have any of that at any point in this film.
I think it was delivery, and it was well done.
So let's summarise it. The Flash movie, I think it's a bit of a cracker. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it was ever going to be perfect, but I bloody enjoyed it.
Oh, I did too. I really enjoyed seeing a proper comic book movie with DC again. And I'm glad that the multiverse wasn't the core focus as such.
Go and see it. I'd just like to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. Please do subscribe if you like what we're doing, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.